Hi, I'm Andrew Robbins, and today I'm going to talk to you about how we gave one legal organization a leg up by using Scrum values and principles to help transform their organization. First, a little bit of context and history. This was at a Fortune 500 company, and when I was brought in, this was with a group of about 100 attorneys. Now, rewind a little bit. All of these attorneys that were in one group used to be spread out across the entire company. Where there was one product group, there would be a few attorneys embedded in that group. As the product expanded, they grew or contracted the attorney groups as needed within. Now, go forward a little bit, and all of these individual attorneys across the company were consolidated into one office. This was called the Office of the Chief Legal Officer, or the OCLO. Now, all of these attorneys had come from the business, so they had deep relationships with these people. There was a culture of needing to serve the business that they came from. Keep going forward in time, this business grew, they added more products, and so this group of attorneys continued to grow as well. They added more specialties as needed, and they added more people to individual groups as needed. Now, eventually, this company came under some pretty heavy expense pressures that caused a few things to happen. For one, it caused a hiring freeze. This made it so that the people in the attorney group had to work even harder than they were before without adding any more capacity to themselves. So this caused things like overtime, burnout. Eventually, it even started to impact their attrition rates. That's when they called in me and my group. In the midst of this, they needed to figure out a way to do more with the same number of people. And that's where the transformation needed to happen. Before we started diving in, before we started changing things, we needed to get the lay of the land. And so we used a combination of Agile and Lean techniques to do exactly that. Everything from go-sees, where we would actually talk to the people doing the work. They would screen share for us and show us how the flow of work went, where the frustrations were, where the parts of work that they really loved were. We conducted focus groups as well. Through those, we got to see how different groups of attorneys interacted with each other, even though they were on different teams. We also got to see how the frontline workers interacted with different levels of management. We conducted process mapping so we could understand the flow of work, all of the decision points, and where the bottlenecks were. We also put out a culture survey so that people we didn't directly interact with in this diagnostic work still had a chance to give us their feedback. And we conducted an inventory of ongoing initiatives so that we could understand what all of the work was, so that at worst, we weren't stepping on anybody else's toes, and at best, we could partner with them and bring things forward together. So, after understanding the business and where they were, after building trust with the associates and the leadership, we were able to start identifying where Scrum and this framework could have the greatest impact, where we could get some measurable benefit. And this broke itself well into about 4 different categories. First, there was this culture of always serving the business. And again, the root cause of that was because these attorneys used to be embedded in the business itself. This caused it so that even a new associate who had a question, or somebody these attorneys had a relationship with, had a minor legal risk, it would get just as much attention as a call out from an executive who had a major legal risk looming on the horizon, even from a regulatory authority. It caused it so that these lawyers weren't getting the biggest bang for the buck. They were putting a lot of effort where there wasn't necessarily a lot of benefit gained. The second category were these attorneys being on meetings where they were just a nice to have at the table, where even from the time that they were in the business itself, there were recurring weekly meetings that they had just stayed on. And it was said that they were there as a ear to mitigate any sort of risk that they might have heard. That said, as we started actually asking questions, sitting in on some of these meetings, the legal risks were few and far between, and they were known when they came up so that the people in the business could have called an attorney consult if they needed it at the time. We started to figure out how the Scrum framework and how conversations could start reducing these as well. There was also inconsistent use of paralegals, and this really ran the gamut. where paralegals were being used in an administrative fashion, all the way to where they were being pushed to doing what was pretty close to attorney work because some of them were about to pursue a JD or were already pursuing it. And finally, just time spent building materials that the business itself was better equipped to build and the people had more knowledge with which to build those things. So after getting aligned with leadership on where Scrum, its principles, and the events could help, we started, well, forming hypotheses, taking actions, and then measuring the results of those actions. The first hypothesis was that daily touchpoints would start to shift the culture. And so we introduced those, and every team met on a pretty much daily cadence. Now, this was all rooted in Scrum values and Scrum principles. For instance, these daily touchpoints took courage because the frontline associates needed to be able to speak up and say, I don't know if I should be doing this. I don't know if this is a bigger priority than something else that's trying to get my attention. It took openness for leadership to have those conversations with their people. And it took respect for everybody so that we didn't go back and blame the person or blame the history. We started blaming the process so that we could actually start re-engineering who was doing what the environment was, and how people interacted with the work. The second hypothesis was that structured problem solving would create a measurable benefit. And to that end, we started focusing on the critical few Kaizens. It took focus to narrow that to just a few, and it took courage to go after problems that had been there a while that nobody else was willing to touch. The third hypothesis, that connecting the work to the strategy would help people prioritize. And so with senior leadership, we created what's called a Hoshin strategy, where we outline breakthrough goals of 3 to 5 years out. We said, here are the annual goals that will feed into it. Here are the projects that will help us get further on those annual goals. And here are the metrics by which we can say whether or not those projects were successful. This one also took focus, and it took openness of upper leadership to say, this is where we're drawing the line in the sand. This is what we're after, and to communicate that to everybody underneath them. Fourth, that leading practices would be welcome for everybody where there was confusion and where variation was causing an issue. This led to actions 4 and 5 of implementing those leading practices for all of the groups. And that took commitment for the groups to make that a guiding north, a true north, at their daily events, where they would go back to that and consult it and have a discussion based on those leading practices if there was confusion, or if a leader started seeing a group put work towards something where there wouldn't be too much benefit. And that fifth action, introducing some sort of standards for the paralegals so that they were doing work that was commensurate with what they were hired in to do. These were talented individuals, all of whom could do more than administrative work, and some of whom weren't equipped to do that work that was verging on the work that an attorney with a JD would do. And so those standards really helped provide a true north, and even led to creating a new role for those paralegals who were more senior and more experienced. All of this we measured so that we could tell leadership, this is the result that these principles, that these actions are having. First off, where we were solving problems in a silo before, now we had a number of Kaizens that were directly aligned to the strategy and that we could measure. For example, they were outsourcing a decent bit of work to other attorney groups outside this company. We started asking, what would it cost to bring that work back in? If we had fewer external vendors, could we reduce the price of those few that we had that we were out asking to do more work? The second, before, across those 4 categories, we had 100 attorneys collectively spending 1,000 hours a week on those activities. We reduced that by 400 hours so that at the end of the year, we were saving over $1.5 million of time that we were able to repurpose towards the growing product groups within this company and repurpose towards Kaizen initiatives so that these attorneys could make themselves better and continuously improve their own processes. And finally, where there were weeks of decision latency and communication latency between town halls or monthly meetings, now it was just a few days where when a frontline attorney had a question, they would ask, it would get all the way up to senior leadership, and the answer would get cascaded back down. Or there was an announcement that a senior leader needed to make that would be cascaded across the entire organization. With these hypotheses, these actions, and these measures, we were able to give this group a start towards doing twice the work in half the time, and their journey only continued in the years after.